Welcome to the Tabletop Inventing Podcast. We're here with Linda Polin from Pepperdine University, and I'm going to ask Linda to tell us a little bit about herself.
All right. I am a professor of learning and technology at Pepperdine. I run the doctoral program that we have here, and it's now in its 20th year, so we've been doing it for 20 years. It's a hybrid program, partially online, partially face-to-face. We also have a master's, and it is in learning technologies. It's an applied program. I come from the humanities. We were discussing earlier about English majors. I was an English major, and it was pre-computers, and I just sort of fell into this stuff, and it became a fascination. And in the early days, shortly after the Apple giveaway in '83 to schools here in California, the state colleges were looking for people who could step up and teach classes. And I happened to have had a little tiny bit of background on technology in a grant I was doing. Had a BitNet address, did my dissertation at WordStar on punch cards. So I got these jobs, and then the rest was history. I just sort of fell into this and thought, this stuff's cool. And having a kid, of course, keeps you current. You get to find out what all the cool toys are. And it's just a hobby out of control, basically.
So what's the unique perspective that the English background brings to your technology focus now?
Oh, probably a couple of things. The first is the obvious, two cultures issue of, is technology something that's really oriented towards STEM and hard sciences, and people who do coding and people who can't do math are going to have trouble, or sometimes you see humanities people that allegedly, I say allegedly, are reluctant. That, plus I also tend to be more conceptually oriented and be interested in sort of the big ideas around technology, I think. So, but I'll tell you, when we first started our master's program, the people who were the quickest to jump on board and get involved were in fact the humanities people.
Interesting.
And then the math and science people. The last people who sort of got in the game were the history people, and I can totally see why that would be, right? Because, history, like holding on to the past. You like the past.
Interesting.
A lot of change.
I knew a history major. I don't think he's like that at all, but he's probably an unusual. He fits way over on the other side of the spectrum in history
And I don't
majors.
want to classify an entire group of people.
I'm not actually sure I know very many history people other than him. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So one of the so we're going to narrow our way down through a couple of questions here, but one of the first ones that I like to spring on people is when we live in a time when we can hop on the internet and we can get an answer from Google or Wikipedia and effectively look like we raise our IQ by 20 points or so. In that type of environment, what does it mean to be educated?
Okay. Well, I think it's important to differentiate information from knowledge, and maybe even knowledge from wisdom. And I think it's easier for people to get information. And I think the question about education becomes problematic and confusing for people if they equate education with information. So if school is about getting information, learning this fact, learning that procedure, and you can find those things out online, then yeah, school looks hugely irrelevant or unnecessary. But if school is a place where you talk about or engage with using that material, or looking it up for some purpose that you need help accomplishing, then I think there's a place for education. So I see education as sort of moving you off of information through knowledge, which might be sort of the more abstract ideas, into wisdom, which is sort of the abstract ideas that you've lived through and tested and have learned from and know a little bit better about. So I think the ideal setup for education is to move you through those stages.
So we briefly touched on the job market for a little bit, and that is kind of used as a strong motivator for education. In fact, I sort of heard that last night in one of the discussions we had with someone remarked that part of the purpose of an education is to feel, how did she put it, to feel a sense of accomplishment after you're done, and then to apply that to finding a job or something like that. What is the relationship between education and the job market, do you think, right now?
Oh, well, I think it's especially important now because jobs are just moving all over the place and changing, and it becomes less about the skill set you bring in the door that's specific to the job and more about your ability to learn on the job and bring skills that make you a good communicator, someone who understands the social, political, technological milieu, someone who's got a critical perspective, doesn't just drink the Kool-Aid every time something new comes along. So there's a lot of sophisticated thinking, and that's where I think an education can help out. I like to think, in the best setting, but there is this tendency to look at school in terms of what it gets you for Monday, and I think that's partly that schooling's become very political. Partly it's publicly funded for the most part. We had a crisis with jobs, and it's always easy to kick education. We're just like everybody's scapegoat. And what are you doing for jobs? And that sort of is why I get a little nervous with all the STEM stuff. Because STEM alone isn't going to get us where we need to go. We need to have some thoughtful STEM, and we need to have some humanitarian perspectives on our STEM efforts.
Well, I definitely come from a STEM background, and certainly looking at the idea of starting a business or the idea of fitting into a workplace, there's so much about understanding people that we don't get told in STEM subjects. I mean, my classical background is physics, and so I went through and had a lot of math classes, physics classes. I had the fortune early on to actually have a minor in education, so I had to go through some psychology classes and a few other things, and so I feel like I have a little more rounded view, although it isn't my first natural language to understand people. So I think I agree with that there's certainly a lot more instructions, not the way where we need to inform ourselves a little better on the STEM side, and not to get so stuck on STEM that we don't see the other pieces there.
I had one class, I think a class on innovation, where I made them listen to Kennedy's original "We're Going to the Moon" speech. Because if you think about it, you could take the perspective that was launching a huge STEM effort. There was a lot of science, technology, and engineering involved in getting us there. But the only reason that sucker got off the ground was because people just fell in love with that idea. He sold a vision. It was like a thing people got into. I can remember being herded into the auditorium to watch on TV the launch of, I'm going to reveal my age now, Alan Shepard, which was like just a little blooper. But, it was like a big deal. We left the planet's surface. And that really captured people's imagination, and there was a lot of engagement around that. Nobody's offering us that right now. I don't feel it in the dialogue about STEM.
No, and that's unfortunate because there's certainly a lot of passionate technology people out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly the Google guys and the Facebook guys have a very specific vision, not all of which has to do with technology. I mean, a lot of it has to do with how we interact and how we, Google has a reputation as being a company that is fun to work for instance. And you can't do that without without understanding people at least a little bit. So when it comes to education, maybe a different question to ask is, so I'm a parent, or I'm an educator looking for a job or looking for a place to relocate. How do I think about choosing education?
As a career?
No, not necessarily as a career. So from a student's perspective, do I think carefully about the local school system before I just plop my kids in? Do I think hard, as an educator before just jumping in to teach in a particular system? Is that a question I should think hard about?
Mm-hmm. The problem is that you can't answer it because education's this horrible onion, so you pick a school district that's good, but it's got bad parts. and you pick a school that's good, but not all the teachers are equivalently tuned in to what you're looking for. So it's sort of, at some level, it's sort of not possible to second guess that. But you can have a critical eye. You can be that annoying parent that goes in and asks the hard questions. I used to write notes. I would go to back to school night and tell the teachers, look, I work in education, all right? So I'm going to be sending you notes. You can throw them out or not. You know, you don't have to, I'm just sharing my thoughts with you. And I think if more parents did that, you know, maybe teachers would sort of tune into that, but it also would help the parents know what's going on and make them more connected. As far as profession, and you may want to edit this out, but when my daughter went to college, I said, you can do anything but education. Don't be an ed major, don't go into education. It's just so constrained right now. It's just so under the political gun and under the corporate gun. It's just a very difficult profession at the moment.
Well, I'm probably not going to edit that out.
Oh.
Mostly because I want to start a conversation. I think we need to be honest with each other about the status of education, and I think we need to talk honestly about the question we love to ask. You know, what is the purpose of an education, and then follow that up with how do we do that
retake it
in this context?
We need to retake it. We need like a movement. We need, you know, pitchforks and torches, and we need to storm the castle and tell Pearson and tell legislatures, you know, give it back. It's ours. You guys don't know what you're talking about. And we want to own it again. And get it off, you know, go focus your spotlight on some other thing and leave us to do our thing. We're professionals. We know what we're doing. I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, because and I've heard that from a couple of people, and you see a lot of teachers coming through. How often do you get that teacher that doesn't get treated as a professional in their organization?
Well, this is a self-selected group.
Okay, it's probably not representative.
But even there, you get people who, well, the very fact that they don't have internet access to the things they need to get to at their school site because the district has decided what's dangerous and what's not, and what their capability as an instructor is to safeguard, or not even safeguard. You can't safeguard kids, but you can inform them and make them intelligent consumers of whatever they run into. You know, the very fact that they're treated like children, I mean, that's something you do to a child. You know, you lock up the sharp knives. That's kind of, you know, and I get people coming in from districts where, you know, well, we can't get to Skype. Well, we can't get to Minecraft. You know, oh, come on, Minecraft? And I understand there's port reasons why and blah, 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 but there's a disconnect between IT and the teaching profession in school districts. There's a disconnect at the university between IT and the people who are doing the instruction. So there's some places where we don't have good collaborative engagement.
So you've laid a really good foundation for this, and I don't even hardly have to say it. This is a conversation. It's an ongoing conversation, and it could use a little tinkering and and a lot of work. But in that, we want to continue to ask those who, you know, are influencing this conversation a central question, and we'll start off with this. What is the purpose of an education?
Well, I have a point of view. All right, this is not truth. This is Linda's point of view. I think the purpose of an education is to learn to engage deeply with the world you live in. I think that you can acquire some habits of mind, some skill sets, some background basic knowledge that enables you to be a more powerful person in your own life. And I think that's what an education's about. I'm kind of free Aryan in that perspective. I think it's an agency question.
I like that. We get lots of answers to that. But I always like that particular one because it brings it back to us, you know, and the idea of learning how to learn and why that might be important, because it is.
I wish we told people
personal.
that, though. We don't tell kids that.
Why don't we tell people that?
That's a really good question. Why don't we tell people that?
Do we just
Because
forget?
then we lose control of them. Because once you tell people you're in this in order to be a more powerful you, well, then people get ideas. It's like, oh yeah, okay, well, here's what I want to do. And, someone who's in charge of a box of 32 kids might not need 32 independent spirits, or might feel like they can't handle 32 independent spirits,
or 1,000 or 1,500,
if you're at the high school, or on and on and on. So school in some ways is a lot about controlling groups of people, controlling curriculum. We have, it's almost like, I'm going to say this, it's almost like a prison system, and there's like bell schedules, and we move it in chunks, and we take roll, and it's like bed check. So there's it's a very controlled environment, and there's good reasons for it. I'm not, I don't think we can just let go of everything, but the problem is we don't stop to negotiate those differences when we hit them. We just bang into each other over and over and over. We don't sit down and say, let's talk with IT about that issue around access, or let's talk with other teachers about maybe opening up the schedule so we're not doing these compartmentalized units. We're not good at negotiating to a better space. So dialogue is really actually a good thing to start with.
That's an interesting, I had never thought of it like that before, but we're the education system. We should know better than that.
Well, nose on your face. But it's a system, so you can't just focus on one piece, because all the other pieces move when you move the one system. So you got to get everybody together. And everybody's got good reasons for what they do. IT's got good reasons.
Yeah. So I wanted to come back to the purpose of an education, because the question we like to follow up with on that one is how do we do this in a practical way? So in your view, the idea of this being about agency and about personally actualizing in some way, how do we create an education system, or I don't know, maybe system is too big, in the classroom and the day-to-day? How do we do that? Because that's where it really matters, is in the day-to-day classroom. That's when we're in contact with the students. How do we create an environment that fosters that?
Well, now I get to make money with the golden answer. I think the first step is to re-empower teachers. We had this conversation in class a little while ago, and someone was saying, well, if I feel comfortable not knowing, if I feel comfortable learning with the students, if I feel comfortable going off the script, where it's Friday at 10 o'clock, so we're all on page 20 of the history book, if we can return some of that freedom to the teachers, and we give them the ability to do what they should know how to do, and not then change the game on them later. Go experiment and play. But oh, by the way, in June, if your kids don't move up this many points on the test, then I have no interest in what you've done. You're going back to the old way. So you have to sort of re-empower the teachers to do what they can do. I trust that good teachers know what they're doing and can find ways to, if you'll pardon the expression, accomplish the curriculum just by doing interesting things and by tuning into kids. I used to do this thing where I would make teachers make a list of, what are the 10 things that your average whatever grader is thinking about on a regular basis, skateboards, girls, whatever. And then 10 things you want to teach. And then we would make little spinners, and you would spin them until you got the two things lined up, and you'd say, all right, skateboards and the Civil War. Make a connection. Think about it. How could that, because I remember as a kid being totally stunned by the fact that there were observation balloons in the Civil War. I was like, wow, those things were like co-present. I thought that was a different world of science. I didn't know there were submarines. What a trip. I thought that was the old days, So there's ways in which you can probably connect up with students' interests and still manage your curriculum.
All right, so we have trust.
Trust.
Anything else in accomplishing that goal of self-actualization in the classroom?
Opportunity. You got to have some more interesting things in there.
Opportunity within the classroom or opportunity after the classroom?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Expand on that a little bit.
Well, historically, we always put the good stuff at home. You know, it's you sit in class to get the info, and then you go home and try things. And obviously, what you should be doing is trying things in the classroom and getting the information at home, where you probably have better internet access anyway, or at the library where it's not filtered, hopefully. Yeah, more sort of moving around, getting up, doing things, trying things out, experimenting, opportunities to muck around. That would be really wonderful in school, because then when you run into a problem, you're with somebody. You know, when you have homework issues, the kids at home with mom and dad who may or may not deign to engage with them around algebra, you know, you're kind of stuck. Yeah, you can get on Skype and ask somebody what the answer was, but they're not going to explain it to you that well necessarily. So if you're in the classroom setting, you've got, my understanding is that most of us who teach live for teachable moments. That moment where the person really needs to know, and you actually can help them figure it out, and it's at the same moment. You need more of those. So you want to create space for that to happen.
So do you think that involves tools? Does that involve environments? Does it involve experiences? What?
Probably all of that, yeah. But I'm kind of big on making tools to make things, not just having tools to make things. I think an important part of subject matter is in the tools of the subject matter. So one of the things that's always bugged me about history, I'm going to pick on history, I'll do the whole thing, is that it always comes to you as a prepackaged essay. You know, when you get a history text, somebody's figured out what's important, what the leading causes of this were, what treaty was, you know, it's all there, and you just have to, your job is to like take that in. But if you talk to historians, they work in primary source documents, and you may get a snippet in a sidebar in a textbook, but no one's handing you a sheaf of letters and saying, you know, so what did this guy think? Was he an abolitionist or not? And how do you know? You know, they're not doing history. And I think that'd be super cool to let people do. You know, it'd be cool to walk into a classroom and say, well, kids, this year in 6th grade, we're going to be writing a textbook about the Civil War.
That might change how we think about subjects. Instead of handing out the answers, we talk about what does it mean to be whatever it is.
What constitutes evidence? What is truth? How does this subject area think about content? You know, if we were in science class, instead of handing me a beaker, say, well, how are we going to boil this stuff up? We're going to need to make some stuff. First half of the year, we're going to make stuff. And then we're going to use that stuff to do things.
Interesting, because I never thought about history. Sorry, I'm still stuck on the history thing. Because usually in history, it's what we do is we remember a bunch of facts. And I'm not against the idea of setting up a timeline where they're kind of like major hinging events that we use as a hook to hang things. But I wonder if we might not get a different view of history if instead of taking the book as the absolute truth about what happened in history, we did look at primary documents and asked, well, what do I think happened based on the evidence that I see? I'd never thought of history like that.
Or you could take now. You could say, well, let's write the book for 50 years from now about what's going on in the Ukraine. What do we need?
That's an interesting
What's going to constitute evidence? What events seem to be worth noting at this point in time? And why? How do you decide what's an important event? And are we being American in our perspective? Do we need to maybe go on the internet and see what Spain thinks? So...
Yeah, important is pretty subjective. I mean,
yes.
It depends on who you are as to what important equals.
Absolutely.
And history might also be able to tell you what's important, because if you trace up and something happened and then like down the road you don't see any evidence that did anything, well, maybe it's not important.
That's a great conversation to have. And if I were running a business, I would want someone who could think about things that way.
No, I think I agree with you. All right, so we have truth and we have opportunities. there anything else that we would add to this self-actualization in the classroom? How do we do that in a practical way?
We had trust.
We had trust.
Not truth. Trust.
Oh, did I say truth? I'm sorry. Trust. Yes, trust.
Because we have to have a lot of iteration. I'm big on iteration, but that's because I'm an English major.
Trust and opportunity and iteration. I agree with the iteration. The iteration is something that I'm very
I don't even like to call stuff failure. It's iteration. And we're not good at iteration in schools. It's usually a one-shot deal. You do a paper, you get a grade. There's not a lot of opportunity to try it again. I have a couple of times told people if they weren't happy with their grades, they could do it again. The problem is that all the people who didn't do well choose not to redo it generally, and the people who got an A minus, want to try and get the A. And I'm just so not a grade grubber. It's really hard for me to identify with that. But the idea, but we haven't trained people in iteration. We haven't gotten them that habit of mind that you do stuff more than once. You fix it. It's got problems. And in education in particular, I think as a field, we have a tendency to try something once, and if it doesn't work, throw it out. And, iPads in LA Unified is a great example. It's going to be a long time before that gets to see the light of day again.
So have we overemphasized efficiency in education somehow?
I don't know.
I'm trying to understand.
There's sort of constraints around time. We're always racing to get somewhere. We have to get to June, and we have things we have to do to get to June, or I have to get to the end of the semester, and I've got so much I got to cover. Do I have time to stop and say, we really need to spend some time on this because we're all confused, or we really need to revisit this, or what do you think after you've done it, or if you had to do it again? Time is a luxury in education, unfortunately. There's this weird
Do we create some of that, though, by trying to shove content in instead of asking about the learning?
I think it's historical. I think it's sociocultural. Schools have been this way for a really long time. A semester has been a semester for a really long time.
I don't know. How long has a semester been a semester? I don't know the answer to that.
But I'm old, and it was there when I was a kid. So... but I mean, it's hard to break, so it's a pattern, and then, I'm a systems thinker. So, that pattern, a lot of stuff's been built on that pattern. There's a lot of employment and maintenance and reporting, and there's just it's this huge system. So if you want to break that, you've got all these ripples down the road. But time is a real gift in education. And when you look at how people learn outside of school, they pretty much have a lot of leisure time to do it. No one says you better be an intermediate skier by next ski season or you're screwed, bro. We'll have to, you'll be a beginner forever. You'll do remedial skiing. So, and pros take lessons. We know that pro athletes have mentors and lessons. So, but we don't do a lot of iteration in education. We're on this conveyor belt. So the last thing, so we've got trust, opportunity, time, and I would add reflection, and that's sort of related to time. To stop and think about things. And I'm guilty of it myself, when here even in our doctoral program, when they get to the capstone, which is a big synthesis project, and it's the first time that they've had to really think across all the stuff and step back and go, well, what do I know? What have I learned? Oh, that's a thing. I know that, and that's a thing to know. And I can say I know that thing. We don't let people do that, and that's kind of good, because that's part of agency too, is sort of to have power, you have to know what your powers are. I can be invisible. If you don't know you can be invisible, it doesn't do you any good. So we need reflection time where people can sort of sit back and go, yeah, I know that. I know that thing. I've mastered that thing. I think those are the 4. I would go with those 4. There's probably more, but...
I like it. So I'm just going to recap. So we asked about the purpose of education, and you indicated you thought that had a lot to do with agency and about self-actualization, about knowing yourself and being, really truly being yourself. And I asked how we might accomplish that, and you indicated that we need trust, particularly trust of the teachers, probably also trust of the students. We need opportunities for the students in the classroom, outside the classroom.
To go off-road.
Yeah, to go off-road, to try stuff, And that kind of leads right into the third one, which was time to iterate. Try it again, try it a different way, and then lastly to reflect on all of that and see what patterns you see emerging. And before we started the conversation, we were talking a little bit about self-reflection. Who am I supposed to be when I grow up? But we can't really even answer those questions later in life unless we have those skills. I
we
think
don't even ask them.
I think I sort of agree that maybe the middle school, high school student isn't ready to truly answer those questions. But I think they should have the skills to answer
they
those
can ask
questions
them for now.
once they have the data. But and they'll continue to get data. But if they don't know how to, trust themselves, trust others, trust, maybe mentors. If they aren't trusted themselves and they don't have that sense of confidence of being trusted, if they don't have opportunities to try things, to have a large enough range to know what that might be, and then if they don't take the time to tinker out a little further to see if maybe they missed something, or maybe they tried it, they need to try it 2 or 3 times before they get it, and then once they get it, they realize they love it and this is the best thing in the universe, and they just never knew they were good at it. And then time to and then take the time to sit and reflect back about that. No, those are good. Those are good. I'm glad we had a chance to talk about that. That clarifies some things for me. I like that.
Well, it's a perfect world scenario, blue sky. but if we can get a stronger sense in the professional educational community, from daycare worker up to president of a university, and we can get a sense of taking back the field from other entities that we've allowed to encroach with agendas that are counterproductive to the things we want to do. If we could all get our act together, I think that would be a very important first step.
I think I agree. Well, we could keep going on. I have about 1,000 questions I'd like to ask you at this point. That's always my problem in these interviews, is I get here and I realize that there's a bunch more I need to ask. But thank you for taking a few minutes and answering some questions.
Good questions. Very good questions.